who acknowledged that religion was good on the societal level. And as far as what Armin just read, yeah, I want to make it clear. I'm not one of those people who says, oh, if you're atheist, you're evil by default. And if you're religious, then you're good by default. That's not my position, because there's atheists that are great people. There's people who claim to be religious that are pieces of shit. So I want to make that clear. But again, this just shows, like, this study that you just mentioned, probably a secular Western study,
he read off about
based on the
7
criteria they mentioned. It's supposed to show that secular people are, you know, just as moral, but you listed things that I think are immoral. They said that more secular people oppose the death penalty. I think that's immoral. More secular people support abortion. I think that's immoral. And there was a third thing I forget, but it just goes to show, depends what perspective you're looking at it. Because if you look at it through Armin's perspective, if you look at that study through his perspective, then yeah, it proves that secular people are more moral. If you look at it through a different perspective, I mean, the stuff you were listing didn't sound very moral. So
we can definitely have conversations maybe at a future date as to the morality of each of these things.
Yeah.
I am really enjoying the conversation with you. I just wanted to let you know, Brad, you're one of the better callers that I've had in my time on the show. But I think we can at least agree that as to the question that we started with, which is, hey, are we strawmanning anything, at least with respect to the example you gave? I think we can agree that we weren't, that we're both on the same page about the implications of the story, the interpretation of the story. We just disagree about the conclusion, which is doing what you think God wants you to do is always a good thing, which is the practical impact, right? Because you agreed, you can't always know what God wants. You could be crazy. You could be hearing voices. There's lots of different reasons. Even reading the Bible, there's contradictions there between different versions of the Bible. We just got done talking about Louisiana passing a bill trying to put the 10 Commandments on the wall of every school, and they couldn't decide which 10 Commandments to put on there. So they did 10 Commandments by committee. So when Christians can get together and figure out what their own morality is, we can maybe have a better conversation. But for now, we can at least agree that in practice, the divine command theory falls way short of clarity, and that causes a lot of problems. If I think God wants to kill my kid today, you're going to call me crazy. No doubt about it. But what if I'm right? And how would you tell? It raises all sorts of problems. I don't know what your thoughts are, Armin.
I want to see Brad, before you answer, I just want to ask, you think we're being fair, right? Because this is, I want to repeat what the cross examiner just said. You've been such a great caller. Sometimes when you see that we are having a bad experience with a different caller, is because, I recognize that it's bad faith, or they're trolling, or there's somebody that just wants to preach to us without actually having an exchange. So we're not interested in having that conversation. But even if I disagree with you, I think like we did a good job in being fair to you in this conversation, because I can tell that you're actually here to exchange thought. Do you think that we have been fair to you and giving you plenty of time to talk? Do you think?
Yeah. I think you guys have been. I think you guys have been fair. I just want to bring up, the story of Abraham is just one example. But what I'm saying is, it seems like non-religious people, when they attack religion, like another, let me think a minute. Like another one they'll say is, they'll be like, oh yeah, in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the woman is a slave. She's a slave. And
I don't know what Armin's position is. I mean, that's a good example, but I don't know what Armin's position is. That's not necessarily my position. I think the best way to do is to ask us first and see if we can find a point where we disagree or where we think we're strawmanning. I have many bookshelves filled with many books, and about a third of them are Christian authors. I read extensively Christian apologetics. I don't get as much. Armin's the expert on Islam, and I don't get into anything other Christian, because that's what I am sort of focused on my show, is preventing Christian nationalists taking over our government and making it a Christian government. But I read a lot, because I do want to understand. I'm an attorney, as you may have heard on the call, and the way you do well as an attorney is you need to understand your opponent's position so you can argue against it. And if you straw man it in court, you're going to get thrown out. You're going to get laughed at. And it's not respectful and it's not productive, because in the end, people like you will hold us account, and we will hold you to account of straw manning. And so I think the best method is to have these kinds of conversations where you call up and you say, do you guys think X? Oh, okay. Well, I disagree. Let's talk about that. And why do you think that? And is there a way we can find middle ground or things like that? So I hope that we've demonstrated at least a little bit that we are trying our best not to straw man. And on occasion, I do in fact steel man arguments to try to give people their best argument, and then I will then attack that. What are your thoughts, Armin? Do you do a lot of reading, I assume, on the opposition position?
Yes, and I wouldn't say Christianity. I wouldn't say slave, because slavery has a very specific definition. I don't think Christianity treats all women as slaves. It does treat them as less than men. It does treat them that they have to be obedient, that they have to be silent, that they have to listen to their husband's commands. It does teach that, but that is not slavery. Sometimes we might say that the experience, like for example, when I'm talking in Islam, sometimes if I want to be accurate, if I want to be careful with how I word things, the experience of women in Islam gets closer to slavery, but still not slavery, because slavery has a very specific definition to it. But if I want to be accurate, it does get closer to actual slavery. When you don't have, because it has some shared characteristics with slavery, as in you lose autonomy, you lose control over your life, you cannot make decisions, you cannot determine your the path that you want to make in your own life. So it does take those away from you, just like a slave, but it's not completely like slavery. For example, you cannot be bought and sold in the market like slaves are. So in that case, like a wife it doesn't have the same experience as actual slaves in Islam. By the way, slaves are endorsed in Islam. Slavery is endorsed in Islam. So yeah, it's not exactly like slavery, but it does get close to it in some ways sometimes. But what do you think about that?
I would concur with that. Go ahead, Brad. Sorry.
Okay. I want to address real quick something you said before, and then I'll address that. So I agree when it comes to the story of Abraham and his son. I agree. There could be a small percent of people that are just like mentally ill, that they read that story and they think, oh, God must want me to go kill my son. And that's sad. That's horrible. But
that's not what we're saying. That's not what we're concerned about, Brad. I think I haven't explained what the issue with this is.
I'm missing the concern.
Yeah. Okay, so the concern is not like, oh, Christians would read the story of Abraham and they would just go and kill their son. That's not going to happen. Okay, so let me explain what the issue is, right? Even in the most charitable interpretation of the Bible, okay, the Old Testament and New Testament. Let's say, for example, actually, all the verses in the Bible that we think is teaching you something evil, something problematic, something that is harmful, is actually our wrong interpretation of it. In fact, let's remove all the verses and replace those verses with teachings that are actually kind and good and helpful to society, all right? But say that mankind should do this because it comes from divine authority, right? Just that claim alone, like let's say, for example, the story was not Abraham killing his son. The story was Abraham being kind to his son, spending more time. Like God had said, Abraham, spend more time as a father with your child. That's so nice. That's what a father is supposed to do. Why you should do it? Because God says so, right? That is a problem. That teaching, even though if it sounds good, so that it's not just the action, the killing child, that would like, oh my God, this teaches people to kill their child. Where are the Christians killing their sons? There's not that many Christians killing their sons. So that's not the problem that we have with this teaching. My point is, a society that is trying to come up with frameworks that defines good and bad based on the consequences of those actions is a society that progresses faster and better. And even if you have, let's say, for example, the teachings that we have today, the ones that me and the cross-examiner endorse, and we're like, oh, these are good standards for society to have. If I come and say that these are good because God says so, that will slow down progress. It gives it a divine origin. It becomes a lot more difficult to challenge or improve upon, right? It becomes a lot more difficult to evaluate if we could replace it with something that might achieve the same goal, but in a better way. Even, let me give this to you. Let's say that the Bible is teaching you good moral lessons, but it's good moral lessons for a specific time. You basically took a snapshot and you said, like, let's stay here because this has there's a divine command behind it. This has divine authority. It has a divine source. If a society that it doesn't define good and bad in that way, but defines it in like, let's constantly evaluate and check what is the best way to increase well-being in society and define those as good. What are the most the path that will take us to more misery, more sadness, more death and destruction and poverty, and try to figure out how we can avoid it. It's constantly obsessed with defining good and bad and the standards and the methodologies based on that metric, based on reducing the consequences that makes us less happy, makes us less prosperous, and trying to go on the path that we encourage better outcome. That society progresses faster. That's what we're advocating for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I would say that can also have its problems because just because the majority of society believes something to be good doesn't make it good. And there's been times that a society has passed something that seems good and then down the road had consequences that they didn't anticipate. So
the standard is not what the majority says. That's not, utilitarianism is not based on a democratic voting of what's right. That is not the moral standard of the moral structure of utilitarianism is not, let's go ask people what's good and what's bad and let's vote on it. And the highest number of people voting for something as good, we will name that good. That is not what the standard is. It's the highest amount of well-being for the highest number of people, not what people's opinions are. When we want democracy, when it comes to representative democracy in politics, when people use their representatives to govern them, that's where we want democracy. We don't use democracy for everything. When it comes to actually evaluating what increases well-being or not, we actually use different methods. The best ways are different. We only advocate for representative democracy when it comes to government and politics.
Okay. I mean, I personally, this is a side issue, but I don't think democracy is really, the greatest system. But let's go to.
But that's not the topic of that discussion. I'm saying, like, when we are trying to figure out what maximizes well-being, our methodology, the best methodology to figure that out, is not to go see what the highest number of people are saying. That the truth is not figuring out the truth is not based on a democratic process. The truth is not democratic, as people say.
I understand that. So it sounds like your position, if I understand it correctly, is that even if the Abrahamic religions taught good morality, the fact that people are doing it only because God told them to is the problem. Do I have that correct?
Yes. What I'm saying is that we're concerned more about the methodology than the actual conclusions. Because yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in and say, absolutely, that is Armin's point. That does not discount the other problems. When the rubber hits the road with religious morality systems, we have a vast history demonstrating why they are bad in practice. right? Let's look at the Crusades. Let's look at slavery. Let's look at all sorts of things, right? But that's not the point. The point is, as soon as you put the stamp of approval of a divine being that created the universe on your rule set and say, this is what God wants, you have just frozen it in time and you cannot change it. You're going to create divisions. You're going to create splinter groups. You're going to create wars. We've seen that throughout history. But even if none of that happens, you have at least stopped all inquiry. Why is it a good thing to spend more time with my son, asks Abraham. And the answer is because God said so, not because we have done studies that when fathers spend more time with their children, those children grow up to be more well-adjusted and better at finding happiness on their own, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's a moral system. A dictate from above is not a system. It's just a list of rules. It's treating you like a dog where you tell it, don't sleep on the couch, and you can't even ask why, because the answer will be because I told you so. That's the point, is a system of morality gives you tools to investigate what the best answer on any particular situation would be. Divine command theory presupposes that you can know what God wants and that anything you say God wants is by definition the best thing. And as soon as you say that, it's never going to change. Now, I'm sure there's fringe Christians out there who will update what they think God wants all the time, but I'm talking about the vast majority. What are your thoughts on that, Brad? I know we're getting on
so well
in the
said.
Call. Getting on in the call.
So,
yeah.
What I think you gave an example right there. I don't know if you meant to or not, but I don't know if straw man would be the correct term, but I would say a lot of atheists, when they're reading the religious text, like I said, they do the worst interpretation, because even what you did right there, you said, yeah, you got God. He just tells you what to do, like you're a dog and you just do what you're told. Okay, sure, that's one way to look at it. But religious people look at it like, I have my creator who loves me. He's perfect. He gives me
Right, we have
guidance. He
to-
tells me what to do.
Let me respond to that. Let me respond
And
to
after
that.
this, let's move on to super chats and the next caller.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do want to respond to that. I think your objection is the metaphor, right? If you don't like it when atheists say, why don't you believe in God? And they say, well, it's because I don't believe in Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster. And I think you find it off-putting that we are comparing God to the Loch Ness Monster, or that in my example, I just compared the relationship between God and humans to that of an owner to its dog. I will use a better one, and I understand that, but it's a specific purpose to drive it home, because rather than being offended by the analogy, you should poke holes in the analogy. Where am I wrong on that? And what I will do is I will change my analogy to that of a child asking its parent, why shouldn't I punch my brother? And the parent, when you are a very young child, says, because I said so. But as children grow up, we tell them different answers. The answer at the beginning is, because if you do so, I will punish you. And then the answer becomes, because if it happened to you, you wouldn't like it, right? And then the answer becomes, because when we live in a society where people don't punch each other, everybody's much better off. Or if everybody did it, we'd be much worse off. And at the highest end of moral development, we tell our children, no, you should go and get arrested protesting or whatever that would normally be bad, because even though you will be punished, it's the right thing to do. There is a hierarchy to morality that we explain to children that starts with do something because you don't want to get punished, and at its higher end is do what's right even though you will get punished. And there's a bunch of steps in between. That's a good moral system. The divine command theory is stuck at step one. Do it because God said so, and that's just it. Don't question me. It's not even do it or you'll get punished, although that's in the Bible, but it's just do it because I said so. Is that a better analogy? Is that less offensive?
That is such a great analogy.
I would say it doesn't offend me because I don't have a religion. I'm just making the point that a lot of atheists, when they talk about religion, they only put it in a bad light. Like, let me
Well, yeah, I think
we need to move on to, because I want to
yeah,
make sure
we
need
we're
to move
done,
on.
but I'll agree
Brad,
with
I
you.
think we've been fair enough to give you plenty of time. I don't think I've given
Please call
anybody ever as much time as you, but I think I'm going to let you go. This was a good call. Please call back again, Brad.